Victoria Hayes stood in the middle of Charles de Gaulle Airport, her camera bag heavy on her shoulder, staring at her phone screen as if looking long enough might change the words. The message from her fiancé Trevor was short, cold, and final. 3 years together ended in 2 sentences. He had met someone else. The wedding was off. Her hands trembled as passengers rushed past her, their excited chatter about vacations and reunions, feeling like mockery. She had been so sure about Trevor, so certain that after years of photographing other people's happiness, her own was finally arriving. The plane ticket to Rome, clutched in her other hand, suddenly felt meaningless. What was the point of a romantic getaway alone? A stranger's observation, the airport cafe smelled of burnt coffee and vanilla pastries. Victoria found a corner seat, hoping to disappear into the crowd. She ordered nothing, just sat there, trying to hold herself together. Tears threatened to fall, but she refused to let them. Not here, not in front of strangers. Across the cafe, Nathan Sterling watched the young woman with careful attention. He had learned over his 40 years to read people quickly, and this woman wore her heartbreak like a visible wound. Her shoulders curved inward protectively. Her eyes stared at nothing. Her fingers twisted a ring that no longer seemed to fit. Nathan knew that look. He had worn it himself once, though for different reasons. His reflection in the cafe window showed a man who appeared successful and composed, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit. But beneath the surface, his body was failing him. The doctors had given him 6 weeks, maybe 8 if he was lucky. His heart was giving out. And no amount of money could buy him more time. An unexpected proposal. He approached her table slowly, not wanting to startle her. Victoria looked up, confused to find a stranger standing there with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. "Forgive me for intruding," Nathan said, his voice gentle. "I noticed you seemed troubled. I know we do not know each other, but I wonder if you might spare a few minutes for conversation." Victoria almost said no. Every instinct told her to protect herself, to retreat. But something in his expression stopped her. He did not look predatory or opportunistic. He looked genuinely concerned, as if her pain somehow mattered to him. "I appreciate the thought," she replied carefully, "but I am fine. Just dealing with some personal matters." Nathan pulled out the chair across from her without sitting. "I understand. Personal matters have a way of finding us at airports. They catch us between destinations, when we are nowhere and everywhere at once." He paused, then added, "My name is Nathan Sterling. I have a plane leaving for Venice in 2 hours. I also have a rather unusual request." The truth unveiled. Victoria studied him more closely now. His face carried lines of stress around his eyes, and despite his polished appearance, something about him seemed fragile. His hands, resting on the back of the chair, showed a slight tremor. "What kind of request?" she asked, curiosity overcoming caution. Nathan sat down then, his movements deliberate and careful. He pulled a slim folder from his jacket and placed it on the table between them. Inside were medical documents with words that made Victoria's breath catch. Terminal cardiac failure. Palliative care. Estimated survival time. "I have approximately 6 weeks left to live," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "I have spent most of my life building a business empire, attending meetings, making deals. I have accumulated wealth beyond measure. But I realized recently that I have never truly lived. So I made a list of experiences I want to have before the end." Victoria's professional instincts as a photographer kicked in. She had documented countless moments of joy, but she also understood loss. She saw it in the faces of people saying goodbye after weddings, in the bittersweet smiles of grandparents holding newborns they might not see grow up. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "The invitation?" Nathan leaned forward slightly. "Because I saw you sitting here, and I recognized something in your expression. You look like someone whose plans just shattered, like someone who suddenly has nowhere to go and nothing to lose." He paused, letting that sink in. "I am not looking for pity or romance. I am looking for a companion, someone to share these final weeks with, to help me check off the items on my list. In return, I can offer you an escape from whatever pain brought you here." Victoria should have walked away. This was absurd, dangerous even. Meeting a stranger at an airport and agreeing to travel with him across Europe sounded like the beginning of a cautionary tale, yet something in his honesty touched her. He was not hiding behind false promises or manipulation. He was simply a dying man who did not want to face his end alone. "I have my own room?" she asked, surprising herself. "Absolutely. Separate accommodations everywhere we go. You can leave at any point. No questions asked. I simply ask that you consider giving me your company, your perspective, your presence." The decision Victoria thought about Trevor, about the empty apartment waiting for her back home, about the wedding dress hanging in her closet that would never be worn. She thought about all the photographs she had taken of other people's happiness while her own remained just out of reach. Maybe running away with a dying billionaire was reckless. Maybe she would regret this. But sitting in this airport cafe, nursing her broken heart alone, suddenly felt like the greater tragedy. She extended her hand across the table. "My name is Victoria Hayes. I am a wedding photographer. And apparently, I am about to make the most impulsive decision of my life." Nathan shook her hand, his grip warm despite the tremor. "Thank you, Victoria. I promise to make these weeks memorable." As they walked toward the private terminal together, Victoria glanced back once at the life she was leaving behind. Then she turned forward, toward whatever strange adventure awaited, and did not look back again. The private jet touched down in Venice as golden afternoon light painted the lagoon. Victoria pressed her face against the window, watching the ancient city rise from the water like something from a dream. She had photographed destination weddings before, but always as an observer, never as a participant in her own story. Nathan sat across from her, reviewing his handwritten list. He looked tired from the flight, his skin pale against the dark leather seat, but his eyes held determination. When he noticed her watching, he smiled. "First stop," he said, tapping the notebook. "Ride a gondola through the hidden canals at sunset. Venice has been on this list since I was young. My father promised to bring me once, but he died before we could make the trip." Victoria felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry about your father. Life is full of postponed promises," Nathan replied quietly. "I am learning not to postpone anymore." The hidden canals, their hotel overlooked the Grand Canal, a restored palazzo with frescoed ceilings and marble floors. True to his word, Nathan had arranged separate suites. Victoria unpacked her camera equipment, her fingers moving through familiar motions that helped ground her racing thoughts. What was she doing here? She barely knew this man, but when Nathan knocked on her door an hour later, dressed more casually in a linen shirt and looking almost boyish despite his age, her doubts quieted. They walked through narrow streets where laundry hung between buildings and cats sunned themselves on ancient stones. The Venice of tourists gave way to something more intimate, more real. The gondolier Nathan hired spoke little English but understood romance. He guided them away from the crowded waterways into smaller canals where buildings leaned close enough to touch. The water reflected sunset colors, turning everything amber and rose. Victoria pulled out her camera instinctively, but Nathan gently touched her wrist. "Just experience it," he suggested. "You spend your life documenting everyone else's moments. Let yourself have one that exists only in memory." She lowered the camera, surprised by how hard it was to simply be present without the lens as a barrier. They glided through the water in silence, the only sounds the gentle splash of the oar and distant church bells. Nathan sat across from her, not speaking, just watching the light change on her face. "Tell me about your photographs," he said eventually. "What draws you to weddings?" Victoria considered the question. "I suppose I love capturing the moment when people promise forever to each other. That instant when everything feels possible." She paused, pain flickering across her face. "Though I am learning that promises are easier to make than keep." Confessions over wine that evening, they sat at a small restaurant tucked away from tourist routes. The owner, an elderly woman with silver hair, served them personally, speaking rapid Italian that Nathan somehow understood. He ordered for them both, and Victoria found herself trusting his choices. Over pasta and local wine, they talked. Really talked in a way Victoria had not done with anyone in years. Nathan asked about her childhood in Oregon, her relationship with her parents. What made her pick up a camera in the first place? He listened with full attention, as if her answers mattered more than anything else in the world. When she finally asked about his life, his business empire, he waved it away. I built hotels and resorts across 3 continents. I made more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes. I attended charity galas and shook hands with presidents. He took a sip of wine. None of it made me happy. I was successful at everything except living. What would have made you happy? Victoria asked. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. This. Sitting in a small restaurant in Venice with someone who sees me as just Nathan, not as a bank account or a business opportunity. Eating pasta that tastes like someone's grandmother made it. Talking about things that matter. Victoria felt her chest tighten. There was something achingly honest about him, stripped of pretense. She thought about Trevor, who had always been performing. Was always concerned about appearances and social media and what people thought. Nathan seemed to have moved beyond all that. She envied his freedom. Barcelona nights 3 days later, they arrived in Barcelona. The city pulsed with energy, its streets alive with music and laughter. Nathan moved slower here, and Victoria noticed him pausing to catch his breath more often. She wanted to suggest he rest, but remembered his words about not wanting pity. They visited Park Güell in the morning. Wandering through Gaudi's whimsical creations, Nathan sat on a mosaic bench, looking out over the city, and Victoria finally allowed herself to take photographs. She captured him in profile, the morning light catching the gray at his temples, his expression peaceful despite everything.
Oh, what are you thinking?
She asked, sitting beside him. That I waited too long to see this, he admitted. I always thought there would be time. Next year, next decade. Time felt infinite until suddenly it was not. Victoria reached over and took his hand without thinking. His fingers curled around hers, warm and alive. They sat like that for a while, to people holding on to the present moment because it was all they had. The night that changed things that evening. Nathan insisted on taking her to a flamenco show in a basement venue where locals gathered. The space was intimate, crowded with small tables and the scent of wine and perfume. When the dancers emerged, the air itself seemed to catch fire. The performance was raw and passionate, feet striking the wooden floor like heartbeats, hands clapping out complex rhythms. The lead dancer moved with fierce grace, her red dress swirling, her expression alternating between anguish and defiance. Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. When the show ended, they walked along the beach. The Mediterranean stretched dark and endless, waves whispering against the sand. Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her. Thank you for these days, he said quietly. I know this arrangement is strange. I know you came because you were hurting and had nowhere else to go, but you have given me something I did not expect. What is that? Victoria asked, her heart beating faster. Hope, not for more time, because that is not coming, but hope that these weeks will matter, that I will leave this world having truly lived in it. Victoria stepped closer to him. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his body was already betraying him. But she also saw the light in his eyes, the genuine warmth when he looked at her. Without overthinking it, she rose on her toes and kissed him. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than an answer. Nathan responded carefully, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. When they pulled apart, both were trembling. Victoria, he whispered, and there was warning in his voice. You should not fall for a dying man. She smiled sadly. Too late. I think I started falling the moment you told me the truth in that airport cafe. The weight of reality back at their hotel, Victoria could not sleep. She stood on her balcony, watching the city lights blur through tears. She was falling in love with someone who was leaving, someone who had an expiration date. It was the cruelest kind of gift. In his own room, Nathan sat on the edge of his bed, a bottle of medication in his hands. He had not expected this. He had not expected her. The plan was simple. See the world, check off his list, die with some dignity. He had not planned on caring this deeply, on wanting to stay. He pulled out his phone and looked at the medical reports again. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Not enough time. Never enough time, but when he thought of Victoria's smile, the way she had kissed him on that beach, he realized something important. Maybe the amount of time did not matter as much as what you did with it. Maybe 6 weeks of really living was worth more than decades of sleepwalking through existence. He opened his notebook and drew a line. Through another item. Fall in love. He had not meant for it to happen, but there it was. Undeniable and terrifying and absolutely real. In the morning, they would fly to Iceland. There were still items left on his list, still moments to collect. And now, there was Victoria. Saw him not as a dying man, but as simply a man worth knowing. The thought both terrified and comforted him as he finally closed his eyes and let sleep claim him. The cold hit them the moment they stepped off the plane in Reykjavik. Victoria pulled her coat tighter, her breath forming clouds in the Arctic air. Nathan stood beside her, looking smaller somehow in the vast landscape of black volcanic rock and distant glaciers. His hand found hers naturally now, her fingers intertwining as if they had been doing this for years instead of days. Their guide, a cheerful woman named Sigrid, drove them through terrain that felt otherworldly. Mountains rose like sleeping giants, their peaks dusted with snow. Geothermal pools steamed in the distance, and everywhere there was a sense of raw, untamed beauty. Victoria had her camera out now, unable to resist capturing the stark magnificence around them. But mostly, she photographed Nathan, the way he gazed out the window with wonder. The small smile that played on his lips when he caught her watching him. The careful way he moved, as if his body was becoming more fragile with each passing day. She saw it clearly now. The slight wheeze in his breathing. The way he gripped the seat when they hit bumps in the road. The medication he took when he thought she was not looking. Time was running out faster than either of them wanted to acknowledge. The cabin at the edge of the world, Sigrid, dropped them at a remote cabin perched on a hillside overlooking a glacial lake. The structure was small but beautifully appointed, all wood and glass with views that stretched forever. A fireplace dominated one wall, already crackling with warmth. The forecast shows clear skies tonight, Sigrid told them with a knowing smile. Perfect for the northern lights. They should be spectacular. She left them with supplies and instructions, her jeep disappearing down the winding road until they were utterly alone. Victoria stood at the window, watching the afternoon light paint the landscape in shades of blue and silver. Nathan came up behind her, not touching, just standing close enough that she could feel his presence. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Of dying?" He considered the question. "I was at first. Terrified, actually. But now I find I am more afraid of wasting whatever time remains. Of not saying the things that need to be said." Victoria turned to face him. His eyes held depths she was still discovering, layers of vulnerability and strength intertwined. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, memorizing the feel of him. "Then say them," she whispered. Words unspoken, Nathan took her hand from his face and held it against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, irregular and uncertain beneath her palm. "I did not plan this," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "When I saw you in that airport, I thought I was offering you an escape. I thought I was being generous, sharing my final adventure with someone who needed distraction from pain. But somewhere between Venice and Barcelona, between gondolas and flamenco dancers, something shifted." Paused, taking a shaky breath. "You made me want to live, Victoria. Really live, not just exist. You made me angry at my body for failing me, because now I have someone worth staying for. And that is both the greatest gift and the cruelest curse you could have given me." Tears slid down Victoria's cheeks. "I know the feeling. I spent 3 years with Trevor, and I never felt as alive as I have in these 2 weeks with you. I never laughed as freely or cried as honestly. You gave me permission to feel everything instead of hiding behind my camera lens." She stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. "I love you, Nathan Sterling. I know that is foolish and reckless and going to destroy me when you are gone. But I love you anyway, and I am not sorry for it." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. His face buried in her hair, and she felt the dampness of his own tears against her neck. "I love you too," he whispered. "God help me, I love you too." Dancing with darkness, they made dinner together in the cabin's small kitchen, moving around each other with easy familiarity. Nathan told stories from his childhood, memories he had kept locked away for decades. Victoria shared her dreams of photographing wild places, of creating art that mattered, instead of just documenting other people's happiness. As evening fell, they bundled up in warm clothes and went outside. The cold was intense, stealing their breath, but the sky was beginning to put on a show. First, faint ribbons of green appeared on the horizon, barely visible. Then, slowly, the aurora began to dance. Colors rippled across the darkness like silk scarves, caught in an invisible wind. Green and violet and occasionally flashes of pink, moving in patterns that seemed both random and choreographed. Victoria had seen photographs of the northern lights her entire life, but nothing prepared her for the reality. Nathan stood beside her, tilted back to watch the sky, his face illuminated by the ethereal glow. She wanted to photograph this moment, to preserve it forever. But she remembered his words in Venice about experiencing instead of documenting. So she simply stood with him, their gloved hands clasped, watching nature paint the sky. "My last item," Nathan said softly. "See the northern lights with someone I love." Victoria's throat tightened. She turned to look at him and saw tears freezing on his cheeks. The lights continued their dance above them, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. Beautiful and eternal, while they were so heartbreakingly temporary, the confession back inside. Warming themselves by the fire, Nathan suddenly doubled over with coughing. Victoria rushed to his side, her nurse instincts taking over even though she was not actually a nurse. She helped him to the couch, brought him water, watched helplessly as the spasm passed. When he could breathe again, he looked at her with exhausted eyes. "It is getting worse faster than I expected. We should get you to a hospital," Victoria said urgently. "No." His voice was firm, despite its weakness. "No hospitals, no machines, no desperate measures. That was never the plan. I want to finish this journey on my own terms. Nathan, please." "Victoria." He took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I have had the best 2 weeks of my life because of you. Do not let the ending overshadow that. Do not let fear steal these final moments from us." She wanted to argue, to insist there was still hope, still options. But looking into his eyes, she saw the truth. He had made peace with his fate. He was asking her to make peace with it too. "How long?" she whispered. "Days maybe. Perhaps a week, if I am lucky." He smiled sadly, though I am not sure if more time would be lucky or cruel at this point. The promise that night they lay together in front of the fire, not sleeping, just holding each other. Victoria memorized everything. The sound of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers, the way his fingers traced patterns on her arm. "What happens after?" she asked into the darkness. "After you are gone, how am I supposed to go back to my regular life?" Nathan was quiet for a long time. "You live," he finally said. "You take your camera and you photograph wild places like you always dreamed. You fall in love again with someone who can give you the forever I cannot. You let yourself be happy without guilt. I do not know if I can." "You can. You are stronger than you realize." He tilted her face up to look at him. "Promise me, Victoria. Promise me you will not let my death become the defining moment of your life. Let these weeks be a chapter, a beautiful chapter, but not the whole story." Victoria wanted to refuse, to tell him she could never love anyone else. But she saw the plea in his eyes, the need for her to survive this when he could not. So she nodded, even though the promise felt like betrayal. "I promise." The dawn after 3 days later, back in Reykjavik, Nathan's condition worsened dramatically. Victoria got him to a small private clinic where doctors confirmed what they both already knew. His heart was failing rapidly. He had hours, maybe a day. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, watching machines monitor the life slowly ebbing from him. He drifted in and out of consciousness, but whenever he woke, his eyes sought her face. "No regrets," he whispered during one lucid moment. "No regrets," she echoed, though her heart was shattering. As the sun rose over the strange, beautiful landscape of Iceland, Nathan Sterling took his final breath. Victoria felt the exact moment he left, felt the stillness that replaced the struggling rhythm of his failing heart. She stayed there, holding his hand long after it grew cold, unable to let go. 6 months later, Victoria stood on a cliff in Patagonia, her camera capturing the raw beauty of mountains and glaciers. She had kept her promise. She had traveled to wild places, created art that moved people, slowly learned to live with the grief that would always be part of her. In her backpack, she'd carried Nathan's notebook, the items all checked off. At the end, in his handwriting, was a final entry she had discovered after he died. Help Victoria find her wings again. She pulled out the notebook now, looking at those words. Tears came as they still did, but they were gentler now. Mixed with gratitude instead of just pain, Nathan had given her 2 weeks of absolute presence, unconditional love, of permission to feel everything fully. He had shown her that life was not about the quantity of time, but the quality of moments. And in showing her how to live, he had somehow made his death bearable. As the Patagonian wind whipped her hair and the sun painted everything gold, Victoria whispered into the vastness, "Thank you." Somewhere she hoped he heard. Somewhere she believed he was smiling. She raised her camera and captured the moment, not to preserve it, but to honor it. Then she turned toward the trail leading back to the world, ready to continue the story he had helped her begin.